All right, Jeremy Burrows, welcome, man. It's good to talk to you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
As the author of the Leader Assistant, which I know has sold a ton of copies, and I'm excited to kind of hear more about what else it's done for your business or for you and your career. But I want to start at the very beginning, which is just like, where did the kernel of the idea for writing a book come about?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Great question. I've been an executive assistant for almost 18 years now, and I was in between jobs. My last executive had gotten fired, and I decided to take a break and decided I had burned out, and he had burned out, and trying to figure out what to do with my life. Sold my house, sold most of our belongings. My wife and I took our two little boys literally to the mountaintop in Colorado to figure out what we were going to do with our lives. And through that whole process, I realized that I wanted to help. I wanted to avoid burnout. I wanted to avoid making the same mistakes, but I also wanted to help other people and specifically other assistants and executives with assistants avoid making the same mistakes. So I just started blogging. I started networking. I started coaching some of the executives I knew that had assistants. And fast forward a couple of years, I had been doing that, and I had gotten a new EA to the CEO gig at a software company called Capacity. And I was to the point where was having the same conversations over and over again. I was having the same coaching sessions over and over again. I was sharing the same advice to groups of assistants at different companies and organizations. And I realized, you know what, if I really want to help as many assistants as possible, I've got to get this down into a shareable, scalable version. And I thought, okay, well, a book would be a pretty easy way not easy to write the book, but easy way to distribute it once the book is done. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe I should write a book. And so that I started looking at my blogs, and I was like, man, I have like 75,000 words written already. And, so that kind of triggered it. And yeah, we can talk about the whole process. But once I realized I had enough to say and I knew what was helpful, and then I sat down and figured out an outline, it was off to the races.
That's great. There's a couple of good heuristics in there. I think the like feeling like you're repeating yourself is actually a great heuristic of like, man, I've had the same phone call 50 times. Everybody's asking the same questions. I'm giving the same answers, and they love it. And, they are changed because of it. That's a great answer. The other is, how long have you been blogging to come up with that 75,000 words?
I started in 2016, and I sat down to figure out the outline and decide to write the book in 2019, probably late summer 2019 is when I really sat down and was like, oh, I've got this many words written, and now let's figure out if I can come up with an outline that I like. And then once I found the outline, I was like, all right, well, I've got this content to put in this part of the outline. I've got this blog post that I can rewrite for this part and piece it together.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, I think it's really smart to start over with a blank sheet of paper and write a book outline rather than and see which blogs work or what content works rather than trying to just like jam them all in. So by that point, when you decided to write a book, you had a coaching business primarily.
Yeah, I was mostly, so let's see, I was doing some speaking here and there, training. I was doing one-on-one coaching. I had couple online courses. I had I still have a 30-day assistant challenge. It's like an email course for assistants. And then of course I was full-time executive assistant as I still am. And then
Yeah, busy.
yeah. So then I actually launched my podcast, the Leader Assistant podcast, in March of 2019. And then, started, like I said, putting together the outline of the book in late summer, early fall 2019. So those were kind of the pieces. I saw, okay, if I do a podcast, I want to do it well, and I want to do it consistently for a long period of time. And so I'm approaching 1 million downloads. I'm approaching episode 300. And the that was kind of one of those things I saw as like a credibility pillar in the executive assistant world. And so the other credibility pillar that I was interested in was a book. So that's what brought me to that process.
And did the podcast help you in the writing or the marketing of the book?
Oh yeah, totally. It helped me a lot because I interviewed a lot of people and I learned a lot about different perspectives on the assistant world. And it also helped me verify a lot of my ideas. And then once I had the book and I was writing the book, I actually would use chapters from the book as episodes of the podcast. So I would kind of double dip, if you will, on the content creation. And then also, obviously that would promote it. So I'd share, I did my own audiobook as well. And so I would share an audiobook chapter on the podcast and then say, hey, if you're interested in this, if this is helpful, you can get the whole audiobook on Audible and Amazon and whatever.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you, let's talk about the creative process a little bit. How did your vision for the book change through the sort of the journey of going from this outline to, and when did you actually publish the book? 2020, right? So it's at least a year.
Right after the global pandemic was kicked in and we were all on lockdown. I know, right?
Yeah, a lot of reading time.
Yeah. I think I had some friends that had published books that were best-selling authors. I had worked with my prior executive. I had worked with him and project managed a couple of books that he published that were pretty successful. So I really had a good idea of how the process worked, but I didn't understand how emotionally taxing it would be to actually write it yourself and put yourself out there and be vulnerable yourself, because I'd always, interacted with other people's books. And so really, I talk about this in the introduction, but there were days where you're like, oh, this is going to be awesome. It's going to help so many assistants, and executives are going to be like, wow, this is what an assistant can do for me. This is amazing. And then the next day you're like, okay, nobody's going to read this. Nobody's going to like this. This is crazy. Like, who am I?
It's a roller coaster, man.
Is that roller coaster there? And then the creative process was very interesting because I tried to there's kind of three things that I did at a high level, I think, that really helped. And the first thing I learned from Seth Godin, I remember I was mowing my yard. I even remember the part of my yard I was mowing when I heard this. But I was listening to a podcast, and I can't even remember what podcast it was. I can't even find the clip, to be honest. So maybe I made it up.
Seth Godin's been on every podcast, so that doesn't narrow it down.
Exactly. So anyway, somebody he talks about how somebody came to him and said, "Hey Seth, I have been writing this book and working on this book for 3 years, and I'm ready to get it out into the world. Can you help me?" And he basically said, as nice as he could, "You've been doing it wrong. You should have been putting your ideas out into the world for the last 3 years. Then come to me and say, hey, I've been putting my ideas out into the world for 3 years. I'm ready to write a book." And so that just made so much sense to me. And so I'd written a couple blogs at that point, but I remember as I was mowing my yard, I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And so, and I'm a pretty literal person too. So literally 3 years later, I had been putting my ideas out into the world. I figured out which ones resonated, which ones were not that great, and honed my process and my coaching and training and my blogs that went viral or didn't go viral. And I was like, okay, you know what? I've been putting my ideas out into the world for 3 years. I'm ready to write a book. So that was the first high level, that's what I did. And that was super helpful. And I recommend that to everyone. Not only to help you validate your idea, but also grow an audience and grow a community, because by the end of that 3 years, I actually had someone to sell a book to. It wasn't just that I had a good book to put together. I actually had people that are ready to buy it. And the second thing I did in the creative process was try to just write a little bit every day. So I was like, I'm just going to write a little bit every day. And that was really helpful to keep me going, because I felt like, well, I've got a lot left, but if I just do a little bit every day, so like I didn't watch as much Netflix during those months. I would just like, all right, instead of watching a show tonight, I'm going to write a little bit, like I just basically gave up all those extra things. And then that was really helpful. But then the third thing is my buddy who is a sales author, best-selling author, Mike Weinberg. He's written several sales books. He actually told me, he said, and it's funny because I had already done it, but he said, don't write the introduction until you're done with the book. And I was like, well, I already wrote the introduction, and I had sent it to him. He's like, yeah, he's like, you can do better than this. And I remember I wrote the book, and then I was trying to sit down with the introduction, and I remembered the story of when I was like 10 or something. I was really little. I have the exact date because I looked it up and I found the date. But I was at a conference, and John Maxwell, this leadership guru, was speaking, and I had this little book, and it was like Leadership 101, and I had him sign it. And he said, probably what he says to everyone when he signs the books. But he basically said, Jeremy, you are a leader. And then signed John Maxwell. And I, remembered that story, and I was like, okay, this is kind of the seed of this whole leader assistant thing now, fast forward, 30 years later. And so that ended up being like, okay, this ties it all together. This is an interesting little tidbit. This is the introduction, and I kind of weave that into an introduction. And then I sent it to my buddy Mike, and he's like, yes, this is it. Yes, and because I'd sent him my old introduction before I finished the book. And he's like, yeah, I don't know, and so anyway, that was a big thing too. Like just write the book and then figure out the introduction.
Yeah, I think that's a great tool. I think I read somewhere, this may be apocryphal, I don't know, but that J.K. Rowling wrote like 17 chapters of the first, or 17 drafts of the first chapter of book one, because it just like trying to get that chapter right with like all of the foreshadowing and all the seeds and opening all of the mysteries. And I thought that was really fascinating. It's so hard to write a comprehensive intro until you know really everything that's to come. So yeah, even if you've done it, I think it's smart to go back and do it with the benefit of knowing everything coming. So I want to go back to the other piece in there about building your audience along the way. What was the audience that you launched into? What had you grown by the time you published the book?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look back. I don't remember how. I'd say my email list was probably, let's see, what was that, 4 years ago? It was probably around 5,000 or so assistants. So a decent sized email list.
Yeah.
And
Decent size and very focused.
Yeah, very niche. And then my LinkedIn, at the time the book was published, I think my LinkedIn, I had about 18 or 20,000 followers. And so those were kind of my two primary channels. And then I had worked with a lot of other partners and assistant training organizations and worked out agreements to have them essentially promote the book on launch week. And so I did the numbers at one point, and I know the launch day, or within a couple of days of launch day, I had at least a blurb that said, buy Jeremy's new book for 99 cents on Kindle on Amazon this week only, kind of a blurb in like different partner emails and different lists, totaling of like 200,000 assistants. If you combine the amount of how big these organizations were. And so that was a huge help. Obviously, really big help for the opening launch week, for how many 99-cent ebooks I sold that week, and getting to the bestseller lists. And I think at one point I got as high as like 167 or 178 or something on bestsellers of all books of all categories. on Amazon, which my buddy that had sold of these bestseller sales books was like, I don't even know if I've gotten that high before. So it was a good splash.
It's incredible, especially for a niche, like a niche market, which is a good idea. But yeah, that sort of like set of allies on launch week is huge, and it's the kind of marketing that like nobody else can do. Only you laying that groundwork, over a course of months or years with those partners can kind of build that trust to reach the right kind of the market. I think that's brilliant. I don't want to out you, but are you public about how many copies you've sold?
Yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth over the years. I had friends that were like, don't share your sales numbers and whatever. But I recently was like, you know what, I'm going to share at least this milestone. But I recently, a couple months ago, if you include the ebooks, paperback and audiobook combined, it's over 40,000 copies sold. So I think that's an average of 10 per year. So it's a good,
That's huge, man.
It's a good run.
Congratulations.
Thanks, man. It's been awesome.
That's huge. I mean, that puts you like so far up there. Like, I think people really underestimate how many books most people sell because they only hear the big numbers of like, oh, James Clear sold 10 million copies. And they're like, oh, there's other people out there doing it. A few thousand books is an outrageous success. To be in five figures would blow most people's hair back. And you're right in the middle and going steady. And this is the kind of book that I think, new people are coming into the field constantly. Like, you're likely to keep selling for years, especially if you keep doing everything else that you're doing.
Well, yeah, and my hope is like there's millions of assistants in the world. Depending on how you search on LinkedIn by different titles, because there's so many different titles: executive business partner, administrative assistant, personal assistant, executive assistant, etc. And but I know there's at least 2 million just in the U.S. alone, and so I'm like, well, I've sold 40,000 books, but there's still another couple million assistants out there, so. We'll see.
Lots of room to grow. Yeah. So what sort of unexpected good things came as a result of your book, directly or indirectly? It's been 4 years now since it's out. What has it done for you?
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to, it's an investment to publish a book. It's investment, money, time, energy, all those things. But I was lucky, money wise, I was lucky enough to make most of my money back after about a year, because of different things that I did directly with the book. That said, I think one of the biggest things that's been awesome with like the indirect benefits of the book, that like, the book helped, but you can't always trace it back, would just be all the networking opportunities that I've had to meet assistants all over the world, all of the corporate training and speaking gigs that have come because of the book. The number one, there's two sources basically where people find me, and one is my book, and two is the podcast. And so it's like, if somebody reaches out, says, hey, I've got an EA team of 500 assistants and we're doing a big conference and we need a speaker. So, oh, great. How'd you find out about me? And they're like, oh, we read your book, or we heard your podcast. It's like always one of those two things. But the book has been a huge lead generation tool. And it really, but not only that, and I knew that was going to happen some, but I think what's been even more surprising, or pleasantly surprising, is the fact that it's that credibility pillar that I knew it was going to be, but it's so much more in the sense of even just speaking fees, for example. Like, I used to do speaking gigs for $300 or $500 or free because I was like, I got to get something, I got to get some experience. And, it's weird. As soon as I had the book out, it was like, I'd ask people what their budget was, and it was, thousands of dollars. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, things have changed. It's like taking your business and your thought leadership, or whatever you want to call it, to a whole nother level. having that book, and that's been a pretty surprising part. I knew there was some of that. I'm not going to say I didn't know, and I mean that's part of why I did it. I was like, I want that credibility pillar, but I think I was surprised by how much of a difference it makes to be a published author.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm psyched for you. That's when you go in thinking something will like maybe work and then it over delivers on your expectations. Like that's an awesome feeling. And I say to people all the time, like a book is a tailwind on the rest of your life, or a book is a multiplier effect on everything else that you do. And some of these examples you are giving are just so concrete, and tangible that's awesome. When you go do speaking gigs, is that, if you're selling 10,000 copies a year, I'm sure people are dying to know what you're doing. Like, are you selling a lot of those through the speaking gigs at the events you're going to? Is a lot of it, do you talk about the book on the podcast? You're running Amazon ads? Like, where are those sales coming from for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's primarily, I think, Amazon, and I've got I think over 1,100 reviews or ratings or whatever on Amazon, and so that I think that helps their algorithm to keep doing that. Podcast helps a lot, I'm sure. Again, I don't have exact ways to track that.
It's so hard to track all this stuff.
Yeah, but I do sell some when I go speak and stuff. But I mean, it's not. It's probably a very, very small percentage of the annual sales. I think mostly it's audiobook, ebook, and paperback on Amazon. And I think it's just, I'd say probably LinkedIn helps a lot. I do a lot of content and outreach on LinkedIn. I've got 45,000 followers on LinkedIn, and I try to stay active with the assistant community there. And then, but I don't really do any ads. I did try Amazon ads like very briefly, I think I threw a couple $100 at it for a couple months or something just to see. And then I don't think I haven't done any like other like Google ads or Facebook ads or anything like that. I probably should someday, but yeah, I think it's mostly I'm just like, I'm going to show up consistently on LinkedIn and on my podcast and to my email list, and try to help assistants as much as I can. And then as I get reach outs and inbounds, if I'm available, I try to help people out and work stuff. Because again, I'm a full-time assistant as my day job, and so just do what I can.
Like, let's not forget the context of like you still have a full-time day job while you're speaking, podcasting, authoring, traveling. Two things that you reminded me of there. I think it was funny that you said people discover you because of the book. I think a lot of authors have the perception that, and this is largely true, like you should be prepared to market your book and be solely responsible for getting it out into the world. However, Amazon is also a huge search engine. Like there's a lot of people that go to Amazon to discover things. And, if you're a event planner responsible for booking a speaker, like, what are you going to do? How are you going to go find that person? You're probably going to Google like speaker for assistant, or you're going to go to Amazon and you're going to search like assistant book or executive assistant. And if you're one of the people who pop up in that niche, tremendous opportunities can result from that. We have authors who sell all kinds of stuff, and the book is what captures the attention of people literally searching on Amazon for a solution to their problems. We don't think of that as a search engine, but it's incredibly powerful. And I think that's probably, what's driving a lot of your kind of net new inbound.
Yeah. If you look at like keynote speakers, I don't care what conference it is, if it's an HR conference, if it's a tech conference, if it's a leadership or, women entrepreneurs or whatever it is, if you just look at the keynote speakers, almost all of them have a book. Like almost all of them are authors. And so like, it's just, you're right. I think it's a good lead generation channel, but it's also that credibility of like, okay, well, you've got ideas. You not only do you have ideas that are theoretically worth sharing in a book, but you also have the discipline and the drive to organize those ideas in such a way that you can put it in a book.
Yeah, it's just finishing a really damn hard project, and putting yourself out there to be judged and your ideas to be judged. That's brave and unique in and of itself. And if people read it and 1,100 people are giving you great ratings, like that counts for a lot. That's a huge, huge credibility boost. So another perception that I think authors have that's not quite correct is they feel like it's sort of them against the world, and it's like a lonely person at a typewriter in a cabin. And all the authors that I know who are having great success have a team and have advisors and have help. So talk to me about, I would say there's one name on the front of the book and 100 in the back. So tell me about what sort of help, what team did you have to get you from start to finish and, drive the success that you're seeing?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the first person that I would say played a huge part is my wife. My wife, Megan. She was helping me like rewrite stuff, like proofreading my ideas and saying, "Oh, you need to be a little bit more gentle with this point, or you need to be more considerate with this point, or stuff like that." And so she gave up a lot of Netflix too during the process.
The diplomacy edit, Yeah.
Right. So,
keep
and
you from getting canceled.
Right. And part of that is, I think like 98% of executive assistants in the world are women. And so having her perspective was really helpful along the way too, of course. But so that's number one. And then really it was just a couple of friends I had that had written books before. My prior executive who had helped him, project manage his book projects, and just pinging them and saying, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you recommend? What are your top tips?" And then one of the other things that my buddy Mike, who I mentioned earlier about the introduction tip, another tip he had that was really great was, he said, "Hey, write down as you're thinking about things and whatever. Write down your stories. Don't think about what you're going to learn from the story or where they're going to go in the book. Just make a list, a note on your phone of all these stories. So every time you think about some story in your life, some experience, some moment in your life, just write it down. And then as you're writing the book, and you're going through and you're like, oh, this is a really good point, but I need some sort of real life example to eliminate this point, or I need some sort of personal story to make this a little more engaging. Then you go to your list of stories and say, oh, do any of these stories make sense here? So there was a bunch of stories I didn't use in the book, but it just helped me get in that mindset of, oh, I just need to jot down these stories because there's all these things that have happened in your life that you don't think about and you don't remember.
Yeah, I think everybody has good ideas. It's just some people write them down and some people let them go. And you got to start collecting those things so that you know where to find them when you need them. You're not going to be able to remember it when you're reaching for it. It's just not how it works, unfortunately. Okay, so once you had that manuscript, how did you decide between all of the different potential routes for publishing?
Yeah, so again, my friends that had published before, a couple of them, one of them had used Scribe. And so I was like, oh, I'll check, he introduced me to you all and talked with your team and everything. And basically I kind of was to the point where I knew I wanted to write it myself, but I didn't really want to, and I knew I could figure out, and I'd actually done some of the stuff for my prior executive, where, the ISBN numbers and uploading to Amazon and doing the Kindle version and this. So anyway, I did all that and then really just figured out, okay, I don't know that I think I just want to focus on writing it. But the other thing was I really wanted it to, even if it was a bad book, I wanted it to be a good book. Don't get me wrong. But even if the book sucked, I wanted it to look like it was a bestseller. I wanted it to feel like it was a bestseller. I wanted it to be like professional. Like I didn't want there to be any typos. I wanted it to be like, this is going to be a bestseller just by looking at it on Amazon, just looking at the cover. I wanted the cover to be really designed well. I was really particular about that. And so that's where I decided to go ahead and try to find help. And at the time, there weren't a lot of options. But again, I went off my buddy's referral and went with Scribe, and basically let you all handle, your team handle, interior design, some proofreading. I did hire a third-party editor to go line by line to really dig it up and tear it up. And yeah, so that was kind of how I jumped into that world. I worked with your graphic design team. I was very hands-on on that process. I had a mood board of like, these are the types of covers I like. These are the types of covers I don't like. So anyway, that's kind of how I jumped in and did that.
Love that. You were never drawn towards traditional publishing for this project. You knew what you wanted to self-publish.
My prior executive had worked with some traditional publishers, and I knew that like, one, they don't really do much to sell your book. They basically, like, in my experience with him and seeing it with a couple of other buddies, like, their marketing is not going to do that much for you. Traditional publishers want to work with people who already have a following, who already have a huge email list, who already have that influence and that niche audience they can sell to. So that was one. And then two, I saw that like, okay, they, in order to get a big advance, like my prior executive was like, oh, if he did get a decent advance for one of his books, but it was after he had already sold a bunch of books, and it was like the second go around kind of a thing. And so I was like, so there was all that involved in the decision. And then I also thought like, well, I want to own everything. I want to be able to do whatever I want. And so I want to be able to pre-order and sell a hard copy version directly and not have to pay out any commissions to the publisher or whatever. And so yeah, those are all those factors.
Use it to grow the whole rest of your business. Yeah, I mean the big money for you is in the speaking and the coaching and stuff like that. All right, last kind of couple questions here. I know we're over time, but your story is fantastic. What was the highest point for you, the biggest moment of celebration?
I mean, I'd say there's a couple big ones. The first one was before the book even came out, I decided to sell, like pre-sale, like hardcover with a t-shirt. So I had this t-shirt, assistant sleeve t-shirt. I had signed hardcover version. I had stickers. I had an online video course and a one-on-one coaching call. I had this whole bundle, and I wanted to pre-sell these to my super fans, if you will. And I think I charged like $100 or $150 or something like that. I think it was $100. And my goal was like, I want to sell 100 of these. And so I thought, okay, if I could sell 100 of these, I can make back a decent chunk of the money I spent on this project before the book even comes out. And it's kind of a fun, exclusive thing to do with the people that have been following me for years. And so what I did is I wrote out this chart. My kids, I actually had my kids write out this chart. At the time, they were 8 and 6, I think, or 5, 6, 7, 8. And they kind of colored in these charts. It was like every 10. So there's like 10 rows of 10, and they would take a crayon and color in when I sold one.
That's
so
incredible.
It was like this. It was just on the fridge, and I'd go, "Hey, I sold another one," and they'd go and they'd fill it in. And every time I'd sell 10, we'd do something special, like get ice cream or watch a movie or something fun to celebrate.
So cool.
That was awesome to have them a part of it and them cheering me on. And then once I got to 100, that was like a big wow, I can't believe I actually sold 100 of these and made some of my money back. Yeah. And so that was the big one. And then the other one was the reviews on Amazon and the ratings on Amazon. I was like, kind of different milestones along the way. But I remember 1,000 was like a big one that I was like, man, if I hit 1,000, there's not a lot of books that have 1,000 ratings on Amazon. And so when I hit that last year, I was like, or it was either earlier this year or late last year. Can't remember, but that was a pretty big celebration too.
That's a huge milestone, man. Congrats again. Thank you for sharing your story and your tactics. And I think there's a lot in here that authors, even experienced authors, are going to take and apply and appreciate. Thank you for taking the time. Where should people go, follow, find you, watch this playbook in action?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Appreciate you having me on. Best way to find me is leaderassistant.com. And you can reach out for speaking, training. You can buy the book. You can check out the podcast, all the things. Or you can just search Jeremy Burrows on LinkedIn. You'll find me if you're a LinkedIn fan and like to do it that way. But yeah, leaderassistant.com. Would love to hear from you. If you're an executive who has an assistant or wants an assistant, this book is a really great tool to empower your assistant and get more from your assistant and really respect them and have them be more of a leader and more of a strategic partner with you. And then if you are, or even if you don't have an assistant and you want one, this is actually a really good way. It's a pretty practical guide. So it's a really good way to even build out a job description, because you're like, oh, this is what an assistant could do for me. This is what I'm going to hire. And it helps you clarify that process. So yeah, reach out, leaderassistant.com. Happy to have you connect.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm gonna buy a copy for my sister right now. Appreciate you very much. Thanks
Sounds
for
great.
doing what you do and sharing with others.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.